But I would, just in light of what's happened this past week and past few months, I want to just say I have never, I started this practice in 2011, and I've had, I know a lot of you very well on this call. Some I don't know very well, some I just know kind of in passing, but I have never seen so much anxiety come through my door into my office when people open up about where they really are at. There's this level of anxiety and unrest like I have never seen. It's almost everyone to a T is feeling that, and just a dampening of spirit like everywhere. So, and I have this like primal urge to go give people a hug, and right now that's frowned upon. So I want to kind of reiterate, I said this last time, but I'm not afraid of this virus. I do have a plan, and it is called terrain, managing your terrain. It's kind of the name of the game. Sorry to rhyme there. But terrain is the name of your game plan. It should be. It is how you will be able to accept this virus and go on with your life. So that's going to be a huge theme here, because I have mentioned that in the past, but I haven't really hit it home, I don't think. And I'd also like to, there's so much information coming out. I think it's important to just acknowledge how difficult it is to sift through in all of this new information, especially as it relates to health and COVID-19 and governmental policies. I will speak for myself. I have a bias. Every time something comes at me and I make a subconscious decision about whether I agree with it or not. And then I will perhaps consciously try to justify that. And every one of us, our tendency is to fit it into the category of what we already believe. And so in the email that's going to follow up with this, I'm going to send a link to a great podcast where an expert really addresses this. I think it's super important because I am guilty of bias. If I'm not too biased, I might point out a couple of my biases during this little session. But I think it's really important. I mean, there's scientific articles that are coming out. There's blogs that I have read, you have read, and how do we keep a really objective viewpoint of everything that's going on? It's a question that I've tried to be even more conscientious of for myself, and I would invite you all to do the same. As of yesterday, I think there were 4,333 documented deaths in California. 80%, 80% of them were older than 65 years old. Over 50% were from nursing homes. So that's an official stat. Last session, I believe it was estimated to be around 45. It's actually over 50% are from nursing homes. I still think that's a huge key that's being left out of a large part of the conversation and the overall mortality. Again, not to be insensitive, but those are individuals with very weak terrains already. And what do I mean by terrain? I mean, how is your body's health from head to toe? What is your terrain, right? I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. The official mortality rate, well, maybe a little bit higher in New York, it still looks like for almost everywhere else, it's still probably going to end up somewhere around 0.1 to 0.4%. Again, hugely lower than we were initially led to believe. I've mentioned this before. I'm going to just touch on it. It has been likened to flu, but it is very different. But just to give you some numbers, while we're at a little over 4,000 deaths in California at this point, I didn't even check the US, but I think we're around 100,000 at this point. Flu deaths the last 3 years, the flu seasons, there was 61,000 in the US and then 34,000 approximately. And then preliminary data for this past flu season, which has ended now, was around 62,000. So a lot of people still, and that's from Johns Hopkins website. So a lot of people die from the flu. But again, you know, this is different. The SARS-CoV-2 is still much more contagious, and I believe the mortality rate still will be higher than the flu. It's also a virus we have never seen before, and so we really have almost no immunity to it, versus even every flu season, even though the flu strains actually mutates to a different strain, we still have some immunity against it. We still recognize parts of that virus, right? The topic, separate topic. Last time somebody asked about the kids, Kawasaki's like situation. That's been renamed to MISC, capital, stands for multi-inflammatory syndrome in children. It looks like it's affecting the medium-sized vessels. It inflames those vessels. It gives them a red tongue, swollen lymph nodes, or they get the red eyes, the conjunctivitis, and have pain. It still looks like this is very limited. And it looks like as long as it's identified in the kids early, the kids are recovering pretty well from the IVIG, IgG, and steroids. They seem to do the trick. I just wanted to touch upon that. It's still extremely rare. So, you know, there's this idea, okay, kids weren't affected previously to about a month ago when this was first recognized. Turns out they are affected, but it's still exceedingly rare. It's still very kind of self-limited. I will send out an article that was, I think it was in the medium.com, but it was really nice. And it just talked about, so again, I'll send out a link to this in the email, in the follow-up email, but their title was Coronavirus May Be a Blood Vessel Disease, which explains everything. And it's very, it seems very pertinent. Again, 4,000 new articles every day, we're still learning. But I believe that, I believe at this point it seems very appropriate to say that it's a blood vessel disease. It has affected from literally head to toe, you know, from strokes to heart attacks, kidneys. It's probably the fact that it affects the lungs. It's probably because it's affecting the endothelial cells that line the insides of the blood vessel walls that supply the lungs. Even there's something called COVID toes, which honestly I wasn't even aware of until about 3 weeks ago, maybe. And again, it's just affecting the blood vessels in the toes, literally. So I think that a lot of the health potential ways to prevent and or treat really probably ought to address inflammation in the blood vessels. Time will tell, but that is my theory at this point. There's more and more coming out. I kind of warned about this potentially happening last time, but there's more and more coming out where there's like a lot of long-term complications, and long-term as of now is only like 3 or 4 months out. Time will tell what true long-term looks like, but there's just a host of symptoms that people are having after having been infected and having the infection diagnostically disappear, but then these long-term consequences, and it's ranging from lung issues to fatigue, like a chronic fatigue, a lot of neuropathies, et cetera, et cetera. So time will tell, but I do believe there's going to be you know, I don't know if it'll be like Epstein-Barr virus or symptoms, a lot of symptoms like Lyme, and that's just in terms of Lyme can cause so many chronic disease or disease states, so many chronic symptoms. Now, One of my big biases is mask. So to mask or not to mask. I just want to come out front. Like I view masks as like an affront to my freedom. And so I just want to acknowledge that. So again, I've said in the past episodes, take what I say with a grain of salt. I still I try to recognize that and then kind of, okay, set my bias aside and look at this new article, whatever article I'm talking about now about masks, and really try to look at it and then maybe move my bias a little bit. I don't know. So um, and part of it is like, I mentioned this last time. I have 3 young kids, and kids read faces. They read facial expressions, animation, emotions. That's how kids learn, right? And it's how adults are just big kids in so many ways. And when it comes to reading facial expression, we are the same. And so I believe that if we are a masked society that is purely fearful, our social interactions completely change. Our humanness literally does get taken away. So if we are to mask, I think it ought to be based off of really good science. Initially, maybe we don't know something, but as more and more science suggests that there's certain situations where masks are not actually useful, I think we ought to change that. So I will send out a link to a really good article. I thought it was just a really good, it's very long, and it talks about droplets versus aerosolization, and masks. And it's an exquisite article. It talks about so many different scenarios, and you can just all dive into that. What I took away from it is a lot. I think that ultimately masks still probably best served to, if I'm sick. So sneezing is probably like one of the worst things in terms of infecting, the potential to infect someone else. Sneezing is horrible, right? You achoo and you just splat all over, like a bug on a car windshield, just splats all over you, right? You're going to get infected from that. It makes sense. Coughing, not nearly as bad as sneezing, but it depends how hard the cough is, right? Really hard breathing, talking loud for long periods of time, there's some risk. I'm in a little, I don't know how big my room is here, 10 by 10 approximately. And I'm going to be speaking for whatever it is, 30, 40 minutes, maybe. Someone would have to be in this room with me. Say they're sitting 5 feet away, right? Somebody has to be in this room for around 24 hours to get infected from me if I were infected. And that's without a mask. So to me, that's not very likely to occur. If someone's just standing there talking for a few minutes, much less talking outside for a few minutes, and kind of normal American social interactions prior to 3 or 4 months ago. So maybe that's 4 feet away. Just kind of talking for 5-10 minutes outside. There's literally like almost 0% chance of someone being infected, assuming they don't sneeze or cough on you, right? And so again, I'm going to say wear a mask if you're sick, if you're sneezing or coughing, wear a mask, protect other people. Outside, out and about, though, it just doesn't make sense to me. And yeah, there's also I saw a representation. It was interesting. So say a human hair, the diameter of literally a hair, is just say it's this big. A surgical mask, like the one that I wear around the office, it's not an N95 mask, just a regular surgical mask. it lets in things 2 to 10 microns, which if a hair were this big around, a surgical mask has holes basically about the size of my thumbnail. And then the coronavirus is about 0.1 microns. And the coronavirus, so this is a paper clip. I just kind of unfolded it. Can't even see. So the coronavirus is about the size of the tip of that. Let me see, right there, the tip of that. And so it kind of shows how useless this is at really preventing a pure viral particle from coming in. Not to mention it can just come in around the sides. Again, though, this does a great job. If I'm going achoo or coughing, it does a great job at preventing that bug splattering all over the car windshield. There was one other article. I don't remember if this number was in the article that I'll send out, but it's like you're 19 times more likely to catch it inside rather than outside. So again, it just goes to like when we're out in open air, I don't see masks being that beneficial. Now there is still like, okay, there's Taiwan and South Korea that masked up really quickly and seem to have done really well, especially Taiwan in terms of decreasing the overall deaths. But I think it looks like it has more to do with how they Tetrised it, test, isolate, and trace. And quarantined. It seems like them wearing masks was kind of just a side thing that happened to have been occurring, but not that prevented the spread of the virus. There's also, the mask dangers, like rebreathing your carbon dioxide for, hours on end every day. There's basically nothing good about that, and it triggers your sympathetic response, which is your anxiety response. It's your fight or flight response. And again, for the past 3 months, almost everybody has been way too much in the sympathetic overdrive side of things. So rebreathing your carbon dioxide, sending the signal to your brain that you are short of oxygen, and then triggering that sympathetic over response minute after minute, hour after hour, every day is not good. So I would encourage people to take the mask off when there's nobody around at minimum, and breathe actual oxygen. On to testing. There's still so much of it is kind of just crap. There's over 100 companies working on various testing techniques, especially for the nasal swab and the oropharyngeal swab. The PCR, again, that's the one that tests for an actual infection, a current infection. Technique matters so much. You really want to, it looks like you really only want to test once symptoms start, day 3 through 8 seems to give you the most likely, basically just more accurate response. Before day 3, there's really no sense in testing, and after day 8, there's really no sense in testing. It literally, mine is like, don't do it. Don't waste your time or the government's money doing that. I just learned a couple days ago, Everlywell is now sending, that's everlywell.com. They have a at-home COVID-19 test where you can do your own little swabs. It's like $100, I think. From the time they get it, so they send you the little kit, you do it, you send it back. From the time they get it, they claim a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time. I don't know how good it is. I can't imagine it's going to be that great, because most people are not going to have good technique, because good technique really sucks to have that test done. There's also the idea of, okay, this is a PCR test. This is an RNA virus, which is like DNA, but there's viral load versus RNA load, right? So a virus is a virus, and you need a certain amount of viruses to cause an infection. But then once the virus dies, it breaks apart, its RNA is still there, right? It might still be in your gut. And so you can still get a test. And even if you're not infected, you might come back positive. And there's a lot more to it that I won't explain because I don't want to get too technical here, but it's just, it really, it's not that great of a test. There's been a lot of articles, some scientific and a lot of blogs going around the last week about negative predictive value and positive predictive value. And ultimately, if you have a test with a low sensitivity and lower specificity, but there's not a lot of people in the population who actually are positive, which is the case right now, right? Depending on what area of the country you're in, there's probably somewhere around 5 to maybe 30% of the local population has had this virus already, and so has an immune response. And if your sensitivity and specificity are not like 99 or 100% or near those numbers, the likelihood that you get a false positive or a false negative is really, really high. Now, as the disease incidence goes up and more people in the population have been exposed, you're going to get fewer and fewer false results. And kind of along those lines, that's why it's really important to get a high quality test. For the antibody testing, we're still using the Quest labs, which uses Abbott. And there's a couple of resources that you all can probably Google and pull up yourself. And the sensitivity and specificity really range somewhere between, I think it's like the lower end of being reported was like 93%, upper end is 100%. When you look at all of it and kind of put it all together, it looks like the key is really to only get an antibody test after day 17, okay? If you do it before, so again, that's from first day of symptoms, or first day of catching the virus if because maybe you're asymptomatic, but as far as we can tell from a symptoms standpoint, if symptoms on me start today, I really need to wait at least 17 days to get that antibody test, or at least the one we do here at our office. Because then the sensitivity and specificity really do approach 100%, or at least like 99%. And so you're going to get a very reliable result, okay? But if you're doing a test that has 93% on any day before that, could be really just like a flip of the coin. I do want to mention, I think I mentioned it last time, but if you are IgG positive, and it looks like it does give you immunity, we don't know for how long that immunity will last, but so far it looks like almost everybody truly is immune. We don't have a lot of data yet to suggest otherwise, other than a couple of case reports. But you really can't transmit the disease again, other than as a fomite. And a fomite is basically an object, like a door handle is considered a fomite. So again, if I sneeze, hachoo, cover my mouth, touch that door handle, turn it, that door handle is now a fomite, because the next person that comes along to open that door touches that slobber, even if it's microscopic slobber, and then rubs their nose, they've caught it. So if my kid has it, or say I've already had it and I'm immune now, if my best friend, if I go visit my best friend and they sneeze on me or sneeze on my clothes, right? and then I can go on along, I brush my clothes, and then I go meet somebody else for lunch, and I shake their hand. I've given it to them, but only as like as a fomite, only as the object that transported it along, not as, okay, I'm getting reinfected and then I'm gonna like spew it out for days and days, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Happy to try to make that more clear during Q&A. I think next I'll talk about, so the terrain, right? So there's terrain theory and germ theory. And germ theory is, I think it was Louis Pasteur who promoted it 100+ years ago. Forgive me, I'm really bad at history. I don't know how long ago that was. But his idea is microbes are generally to be guarded against, right? They're an outside thing that cause disease on the body, right? And then there's the other guy, Claude Bernard, I think, and he was more like, okay, the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. In other words, it's the environment of our body and the overall health that really decides if that new outside microbe ends up causing symptoms or disease in us, right? And there's, and then, interestingly, Louis Pasteur, the germ theory guy, apparently said on his deathbed, or close to it, that Bernard was right, meaning terrain theory was right. And yet germ theory is the basis of literally all medicine in westernized conventional medicine societies. Now, there's a spectrum. Germ theory over here, terrain theory over here. Is one right, is one wrong? In reality, it's a spectrum, right? And it depends on what exact virus or microbe we're talking about. But I really do tend to be much more over on my bias is that we are much more closer to the terrain end of things, and that's how we can prevent this from becoming an issue, right? And on the terrain front, like an average adult my size, we literally have 5 pounds of stool, of poop inside of us. And most of that is bacteria and viruses and fungi and all kinds of other little good microbes. And we would die, literally we would die without that gut microbiome, all of those bacteria, all of those fungi, all of those viruses, right? And I mentioned before how there's literally like more viruses inside of us than there are stars in the sky, right? And our gut is responsible for somewhere around 75% of our immune system, right? And that's a number that's thrown out there, and it's pretty close to accurate, maybe a little higher, maybe a little less. But okay, 3/4 of our immune system is in our gut. We are full of crap, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. Like, we are terrain. No one can deny that. We are a terrain. And so the idea that this one little virus can come in and just knock us off if our terrain is really right or close to right or close to optimal to begin with, my bias, but it's ludicrous to me. So that's my little spiel on the terrain. I'm going to go on other therapies. Hydrochloroquine, there's been a lot out about how it's not really useful. It doesn't seem like it's panning out. And I still, as far as I was concerned, kind of from the get-go, it was more the hydrochloroquine with the zinc that was maybe making the difference. Zinc is very responsible for the immune system. I mean, there's all of the minerals are important to so many different functions in our body, but zinc is kind of, if there was one mineral that you had to pick to help your immune system, it would be zinc. And so I read about the hydroxychloroquine not being useful, but I have not seen a lot of statistical analysis, and the only statistical analysis that I have seen with regard to it with zinc seem to pretty clearly show that for those people who were low on zinc to begin with, the zinc hydroxychloroquine helped. So I'm a little bit confused why all the studies are being done and all of the hoopla is being done with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. I guess because those are just two drugs, so they want to know more about that. I could be wrong, but it's still, as far as I'm concerned, if you are low in zinc to begin with and you get this virus, you are more likely to succumb. Hydroxychloroquine, one of its actions is to help zinc into the cell where it can fight a virus that might be attacking the cell. So if you give that person hydroxychloroquine plus zinc, it still stands to reason, and I haven't seen anything to dissuade this line of thinking thus far. It still stands to reason in my mind that hydroxychloroquine with zinc might help those individuals. Now, if somebody's already got, great levels of zinc and they come down with this virus, well, something else, another part of their terrain is off, and that's who this probably would not benefit, right? So I'm still waiting on seeing more on the hydroxychloroquine zinc front. It seems like when you do go into the hospital at this point, it seems like hospitals are definitely getting a little bit better at not letting you die if you need to go on the ventilator. They're using IV ascorbic acid. There's one hospital in Miami who's actually going to do a study with ozone, which is super exciting, super cool. They're doing the proning. They've been doing the proning for a little bit now, but it seems like they're learning, which is great. It's inspiring that they're learning how to keep people alive a little bit better. So I think the likelihood of someone dying if they end up being intubated is decreasing, which obviously is fantastic. Remdesivir, real quickly, it's an IV antiviral. It does seem to help people who are really, really sick in the hospital. It definitely decreases hospitalizations. But for all of you, those of you who have asked about it, it's only IV. There's a shortage. It can only be obtained in the hospital. So hopefully nobody, neither you nor anyone else will actually need the remdesivir, but it does look like that is useful, and that's probably another reason that hospitalization deaths are decreasing somewhat. So that is very good. Vaccines, I'm still gonna, I'm still gonna say don't wait for that. Please don't. You still might be disappointed. I know there's been a lot of hoopla in the press, and stocks have gone up, and markets have gone up, financial markets have gone up as soon as different vaccine companies mention anything about their vaccine. I'm still highly skeptical. I mean, even though there's something like 70 companies on it, there's still only, there's a page where you can see all the vaccine trials in progress, and there's still, I want to say only 8 who are in even phase 1 or 2. So there's still not a lot out there, and considering 9 out of 10 vaccines that make it to market end up being pulled off the shelf because of harm, I still, again, I'll say it again and again, I still have my doubts that a non-harmful vaccine is going to come out anytime soon. Could happen, it could totally be wrong. I still if a non-harmful vaccine comes out that's effective, fantastic, because that's going to help our world get back a lot quicker. So I do hope it happens. I just still don't see it happening. And this is, I think the two front runners, I think one of the front runners in the media at least is the Moderna, the the mRNA vaccine. They had that open trial of like 45 people. There was no placebo, no double blind, anything. There was a dose of two, I think like a month of two doses a month apart. I think they let out their info like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. But they said that, like, I think they said all 45 of the people who entered it made antibodies, but then when you looked through it, only 8 of the 45 people had actually made neutralizing antibodies, as opposed to just binding antibodies. So you have to, like, not only does your body have to make an antibody, but it actually has to then bind the virus, and it actually has to make enough antibody to actually neutralize enough of the virus to where you don't get infected. So I read, I think just a couple days ago, that Fauci is speeding this along with the company, and so starting in July, I think right now they have something like 600 people enrolled in it, and by July they're going to literally open it up to a 30,000 person study. Assuming that all happened and like results were good from those 30,000 people, it seems like the public at large might be able to get a vaccine as early as January at this point. Again, though, it might happen. I give it like an 8% chance of actually happening that way. That's how I see it. There was the Oxford and the Moderna, anyways, we can talk more about that later. I've mentioned the TWIV podcast, the This Week in Virology podcast. I really like them. Those podcasters literally will die waiting for the vaccine. They're microbiologists, and all they want to do is, they have their hopes hinged completely on the germ theory and that a vaccine will save them, and they think everybody should mask up and hold up inside until a vaccine comes along. So they're super knowledgeable. They have way more knowledge on the microbiology front than I do, but I disagree with their overall assessment. They're very much germline thinking people, and that's what vaccine is. It's like a pure germ theory only, right? It completely ignores terrain theory completely. There's, on the media front, there's the Plandemic movie. I watched it. I have various opinions about it. I don't want to focus so much on that. I think it's more just that there's been this pandemic of unfounded fear more than anything else. And so much of what we were told initially has come out to be just very inaccurate. And some would say we were purposefully misled. Some would say there's people with major agendas behind all of this. I don't know any of that. All I know is that one way or another, whether we were intentionally lied to or just kind of naively misled, everything we thought would happen, like all the models that were put out, have basically just been wrong. And even the World Health Organization, I guess it's probably been about a week ago, but the head or one of the higher ups in the World Health Organization, they're basically said that the models that they're working on are increasingly ruling out a second major wave of the coronavirus this fall/winter. So hopefully they're right, and they're kind of pulling away from Bill Gates. Again, Bill Gates just basically says, like, I forget his phrase, but his phrase is basically, everybody needs a vaccine before the world can turn again. Again, I just think that's so, on that spectrum, he's like literally over here on the germ theory front without considering the terrain at all. So whether he has some major, bad agenda, I have no idea, or maybe he's just simply all the way at one end, out of good-heartedness. I am not sure. I don't know the guy personally, so I won't make that judgment because I don't know. But the World Health Organization seems to be pulling away from him a little bit, at least in how they perceive the second wave likely not occurring. So again, though, all models are wrong. Some are useful, right? I've said that quote a few times, so I don't know. We will see. There was a graph in the New York Times on May 26th, and it was really interesting because it showed how. So there's about 8,000 deaths on any given day in the U.S. Before coronavirus, before COVID-19, around 8,000 deaths. I think it's closer to like 7,500 deaths on a given winter's day, and then the rest of the year is like 8,000 deaths per day. And so there's this graph, and it's marked off, 0 deaths per day. This is the entire US, 2,000 deaths per day, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000. And so there's this graph for like years and years, January, February, right at 8,000 deaths per day. And then starting somewhere around mid-March, there's like this little spike up to 10,000 deaths per day. And then after a month, that starts going back down, and we're kind of like 9,000 deaths a day right now. And, all signs are that it's basically going to go back to 8,000 deaths per day. And to me, that put it really in perspective, because it's like, okay, 8,000 deaths. Okay, yeah, it's horrible that goes up to 10,000, but it's also kind of just a little blip on the radar. That's the way I choose to think of it, right? Maybe other people think of it differently. And I think the news basically ignores those 8,000 deaths a day. The news literally focuses on those 2,000 deaths a day, and then has that scrolling across the bottom, 2,100 deaths today, and every 15 minutes there's a new speaker about horrible things, right? And so again, it's like that media is focusing on that. And not just that it's a little blip, but this is literally a little blip in time. In the grand scheme of things, like, this is a little blip in time. And yeah, it's a major thing. It's a major event in our history. Again, probably goes, last time we had it was 100 years ago. Obviously, certain countries have had a lot of deaths during wartime. But like, this is a little blip in time. It'll be a major blip in time, but it's still a very small blip in the grand scheme of things. So that's the way my brain chooses to look at that. Maybe you choose to look at that differently. But again, for that to cause the entire California economy to just crash, much less the nation at large, and cause 20%, 20-some%, I think, unemployment in California, I just, and I just don't see it. Again, half of those deaths are from nursing home patients. And again, not to, like, I don't have any family members currently in a nursing home, but I have in the past, and they need to be taken utmost care of. But if we had this policy of like, hey, maybe we spend some government money fixing people's terrains, especially nursing home patients' terrains, things would get a lot better. That's how Yoshi sees it. So what else should I? Oh yeah, this idea of, I wanted to touch on this. The goal was initially to flatten the curve, right? Fine thinking initially, but kind of along the terrain word I'd like you to remember is, let's bend the curve. Bend the curve should be how we see it, right? Do the things you can do to bend reality, right, in your favor. Do the things you can do to fix your terrain, to bend the curve, to bend your own curve. So I think we should be bending the curve by fixing our terrain. That's how Yoshi sees it. and you know, on the freedoms front, I kind of mentioned, I mean, you can kind of take away my bias is I'm very much for freedom. I'm very much for science and whatever good quality information we can gather, like let that dictate governmental policies. And so be really smart about things. But freedom, I feel, is really one of the major things that is being affronted in our country right now. And I've mentioned things in the past like the immunity card and how, you know, Bill Gates wants us to have a tracking tattoo, and Google and Apple have worked together to make their tracking app, and there's the Trace Act that's, you know, going through the government right now. It looks like, as far as I can see, that New York already has like in planned forced vaccination, which I think is ludicrous for an experimental fast-tracked vaccine. Why would you mandate something like that? Because there are some vaccines that already exist that really don't have a lot of potential harm. There are some that I think do have a lot of potential harm, but some of them are like, truly, even though I am not much of a germ theorist, it's like there's a few vaccines out there that really the potential side effects are super, super low, right? And so it's not all or nothing. But the idea to possibly force vaccinate starting early next year with a vaccine that has just been completely fast-tracked is ludicrous. There's been the mention that I know some insurance companies or medical insurance companies are looking into the idea of maybe requiring a vaccine, or at least to have a positive IgG test to actually get coverage. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but it's the fact that it's out there is kind of a bummer, in my opinion. So I would, you know, which rights are you willing to let go because you were too lazy to affect your terrain? You know, I'm just gonna kind of put that one out there. Kind of a harsh statement for a mild-mannered guy, but I think it's a good question to at least ponder. I also like Chris Kresser, he's the acupuncturist, great researcher though. He had a really good analogy for this coronavirus, and he talked about it as a speed limit, right? There's 37,000 deaths every year, traffic accident deaths every year in the US, 37,000, that's a lot. Now, if we made the speed limit 5 miles an hour, the number of traffic accident deaths would probably plummet towards zero, right? Likewise, if we had the Autobahn everywhere and this, you know, people were driving 80 to 100 miles an hour, 37,000 would quickly probably turn into 100,000, right? And I like this analogy because you can see how it kind of fits in with the coronavirus and the governmental shutdown policies, right? And there's a sweet spot somewhere, and I don't know what it exactly is, but hey, we can shut everything down, completely shoot ourselves in the foot, kill people's social abilities, psychological, you know, create anxiety and depression and all these downstream side effects, create financial ruin that will take us a long time to come out of. Or we can, you know, do as we're doing and open things up. Should we have, you know, football games with 100,000 people in them right now? Maybe not, right? That would be more like a speed limit of 100 miles an hour currently. So it's probably not a good idea, but I just really appreciated that analogy. And again, I don't know if the right speed limit is 65 miles an hour. Maybe in some parts of the country, it's 65 miles an hour. Some parts of the country, it's 35 miles an hour. I don't know, but I love the analogy. So, you know, on the terrain front, just kind of in closing, I'll wrap this up. Oh my God, it's already been like 50 minutes. I'll add this up. Terrain, it's kind of, I think of it as eat right, drink right, breathe right, poop right, move right, sleep right, think right, speak right. I said those all fast, but again, let's talk about how to really heal people. And again, I'll bet that 99% of people who are either severely ill with this virus or who have passed away, I'll bet their terrain was pretty off. And I don't know if it was a low zinc or a low vitamin D or a low vitamin A or a low ascorbic acid or just a plain horrible gut microbiome where 75% of our immune system resides, right? But out of the kind of the documented diseases, which include the high blood sugar, the high blood pressure, obesity, immunocompromised, the various lung diseases, right? Like 95% of those can be fixed. They can, right? And so that's where the terrain theory, I really feel like should be a huge part of this, and bending the curve should be a really major way you think. It's a major way that I think. So I think I've kind of said my opinions, but be kind, right? Be kind to others. Don't be harsh to others. You can't force people to think a certain way. You can lead by your actions. But just be kind. Everybody is really trying to do, 99.9% of people of us are doing the best they know how. And I would just encourage you all to be kind to others, be kind to yourself. And again, a shameless plug, our health coach, Tracy, and nurse practitioner colleague, Kel, will be doing a group class all based on the gut microbiome. There would be a very good stool test that you can do if you want. But that's coming up. I forget the starting date. It'll probably be in I don't even know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. I think that would be just a great way for anybody who's not sure what steps to actually go out and take. It would be a great way for people to kind of start really affecting their terrain positively. So I'm done. Sorry for meandering for almost an hour. I'm going to open this up to Q&A. So go ahead, and if you know how, please raise your hand and I'll kind of go in that order. Otherwise, we will just start with Craig.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you again for these really informative updates you've been doing. I've found them really wonderful. I have a question. I'm just curious to know what you think about the effect of all of these mass demonstrations that we've had for the last week on and everyone in such close proximity to each other on the COVID situation now.
Yeah, I mean, that's, between Memorial Day weekend and the mass demonstrations, I would be shocked if there's not an uptick in cases within, probably 1, 2, or 3 weeks. I would be really shocked if there's not an uptick. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, because when you're in a crowd, and I mean, even in a peaceful demonstration, you're still like, we want whatever, right. You're spewing droplets out of your mouth. And many people have not been masked while during these times. So I would be, frankly, just surprised. Again, though, I'll bring it back to terrain. Like if we all fix our terrain, we will not be affected by this virus. But yes, I absolutely would be shocked if we don't see an uptick, which I'm sure will have its own political repercussions.
Right. I have one other question. You talked about masks and masks outside. What is your feeling now about masks when you're in a grocery store, for instance?
This is definitely one of those ones where I'm really not sure. There's not a lot of good science to really sway me one way or another. I talked a lot about outside because I think there's a lot of good science to really basically just say, like, I mean, you don't need to do it unless you're sick and with another person, right, outside. In the grocery store, I think it comes down a lot more to, again, if you're sick, if you have a cough or sneezing or are sick in any manner, like you should wear a mask. But it comes down a lot more to use a lot of hand sanitizers, whether it be the crappy sanitizer or healthy sanitizer, like use a lot of sanitizer to wipe down any part of the cart that you're going to touch. That's going to make, and if you're, reaching for something to look at the ingredients list or look at what's in it a little bit closer, like just use a lot of hand sanitizer. That would be my recommendation. Again, I talked a little bit about like, okay, I'm in this 10-foot by 10-foot space here in my personal office here. Somebody else, like even if they're only 4 feet away from me, if we're both maskless, like assuming neither one of us coughs or sneezes towards each other, the likelihood of one of us affecting the other, infecting the other, I mean, we have to have a consultation that's like 24 hours long, right? And that's in a 10 by 10 foot space. So if you're in a really crowded grocery store, yeah, it probably makes sense, right? Because you never know who's gonna walk right by you and sneeze or cough. It probably makes sense. If you're in a larger or grocery store going at a time when there's not a lot of other people there, it really makes much less sense to be required. Now, I mean, I realize you can't really, it'd be hard for a grocery store to enforce, oh, during these hours you don't mask and during these hours you do mask, but just kind of thinking through it, that's my take. Hopefully that made some sense.
Certainly. Thank you.
All right, yes, you're welcome. Who else? Anybody else? Nikki.
Mute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, and hi, Dr. Yoshi. And yeah, thank you for doing these talks because I've been at just about every one of them and they're always very informative. So I just had a question about this article that came out recently where they said that, I think it was in Italy, where they said the potency of the virus is like diminishing. Like when they were taking swabs, they said something about there's less viral load. Did you hear anything about that?
I have not. I have not seen that.
Just read one, so I thought, well, I can't really trust that till I've seen a lot saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can't say anything because I just haven't seen that.
And then my other question was, if they're starting to say this is a blood vessel problem, is the ozone therapy still working really well if it's a blood vessel condition? Yes, right?
In my opinion, absolutely. There's almost nothing you could do that would be better. There's probably a lot of other things that are on par with it, but there's probably not a lot of yes is the answer. It would be wonderful, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. Well, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other? Marianne? Oops. Hang on. My button's not unmuting you for some reason. Unmute. I don't know what's going on. I'm not able to unmute you. I can't hear anything, Marianne. Yeah, sorry, I can't hear anything. And you are unmuted on my end, so it's probably on your end. So maybe play around with that and then come back. We'll come back to you, okay? All right, sorry. Next person. Gail. Hi, Gail. Oops, you're still muted.
Unmute. Hi.
There we go. Hi.
Sorry about that. Just a couple quick ones. We have talked in past conversations about clotting factor. And I remember you mentioning something about in keeping our terrain in good order, one of the things we want to do is make certain we have slippery blood. Talk to me about slippery blood, besides putting WD-40 in there.
Yeah,
I don't want to get that rumor started.
Yes, let's not, we won't even mention that again. Yeah, slippery blood is the best. This condition, this virus in those that it infects and causes symptoms seems to make the endothelial walls, again, the walls of the inside of the blood vessel inflamed, and that thickens the blood. And I'm not actually sure if it's that the blood thickens and then whatever proteins those are causing the inflammation of the cells around the inside of the blood vessel, or if it's inflammation around the blood vessel that thickens the blood. I don't know which causes which, admittedly. But when your blood is thick, so we have our aorta, the artery that comes out of our heart is very big in diameter. It's probably, I should know maybe better, but it's been a while since I actually took anatomy class, but it's big, it's large. And then as that goes through our body, and we're kind of like a tree with blood vessels branching off, those blood vessels get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually we have capillaries that are literally just large enough for one red blood cell to slide through it at a time. And so you can imagine that if you have sticky blood for whatever reason, which could happen for a multitude of reasons, one of which is this virus potentially, if you have even two red blood cells that stick together, suddenly that clogs that little capillary and blood cannot get past it, or very little blood can get past it, which means very little oxygen can get past it, which means no matter what part of the body you're talking about, it's going to be affected in some bad way, whether it's causing a stroke in the brain or a heart attack in the heart or your COVID toes or respiratory issues, right? And so sticky blood is just no good. And what makes your blood thinner is literally doing all of that terrain stuff, and ozone. Ozone also does that really, really well. So hopefully that makes sense. Does that?
It does. It helps quite a bit. And if I could just get in another quick question. You mentioned at the very beginning, you are seeing so many people coming in and they're gray. They are just gray from the load of emotional weight of these circumstances. Couple that with individual lives and how they vary over time. We all have our stories. In addition to getting lots of sunshine, getting some exercise, if you were looking at keeping your terrain healthy, is there healthy supplementation that seems to be also helpful in doing a little anti-anxiety and mood elevation, so that we can supplement knowing that we're under more than the regular amount of stress in this crazy time we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, the very first call I did, I definitely espoused a number of supplements. I want to kind of stay away from espousing too many supplements.
I understand.
So I'm going to be pretty generic, but there are, if you come in here, we can talk to you a little bit more specifically, or if you're getting something from Sprouts or some other supermarket and you just look for like calming herbs, like that could be a really good thing to do potentially. I'll mention magnesium because there's so little that can go wrong with that. Magnesium is like, if there's a calming mineral, I mentioned if there was one mineral for the immune system, it would be zinc. If there was one mineral for our psychology, for depression and anxiety, it would be magnesium. And whether you're taking that orally or as a topical spray or as an Epsom salt bath, like that is just really relaxing to so much of our physiology.
Understood. Thank you very much for all of your time.
Yeah, take care, Gail. Vicky, you have your hand up again.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Do you think there's any ramifications of informing your employer if one has tested positive for the antibodies? So if someone had COVID, it's all gone, no issues. Would you tell your employer?
I don't know the right answer to that question. I think that's, a lot of people have been really hesitant to even test their antibodies or to even get tested initially because they're, afraid that somebody's going to get their hands on that information and hold it against you or for you or whatever. And, I don't know how that's all going to play out. If you want, like in my mind, if you're IgG positive and it's from a reliable test, a relatively reliable test, to me, that gives you an immunity. I know a lot of scientists will say, oh, but we don't know yet. Well, no, we do know because we can use like every other bit of data that we've ever had on any other virus. Like we know that when you create IgG antibodies, it offers you some amount of protection. Now, whether that's 100% protection, I don't know. We don't know. That's different for every virus, but it absolutely gives you some immunity. What could vary is how much immunity. So, hey, maybe you get infected again, but maybe it's a really, really mild disease compared to the first go round when maybe you had really raunchy symptoms. And again, what we absolutely don't know, and this is very different for different viruses or bacteria, is how long that immunity is going to last. I don't know if it'll be 6 months of immunity or 10 years of immunity, right? And everybody develops, when we develop an antibody response, an IgG antibody response, everybody develops a different amount of IgG antibodies. So you also can't say, well, you can't make a broad generalization like this offers 12 months of immunity. Well, for some people are not going to make IgG antibodies, period. They're going to have almost no immunity made. Other people are going to make boatloads of IgG antibodies against it, and they're probably going to be immune for a long time. And so I would leave that to one individual, you, if you're talking about yourself, or this theoretical person to, how's my employer going to take that? Right now, to me, that would, I can tell you as the employer of all of our team members here at Oasis, if I knew all of us had antibodies, oh my gosh, I would be so happy. So that's just, that's what I have to say. But that's a very personal decision at this point because we do not know how that information is going to be used either for us or against other people in the future.
That's my concern is how would that?
And I think it's a wild, wild west right now.
Okay. I got it. So I'll base my decision off of that.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thanks.
Take care. Who else has their hand up? Let's see. No hands are up. Or Gail, is that a hand from earlier? I'm going to lower your hand. You can raise it again if you want. Brad.
I've been taken care of, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Brad.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I got a question. You were talking about the terrain theory versus the germ theory. So if your terrain is strong, for lack of a better term, are you practically immune then, or is it? I know you can't. I don't want to, put you on the spot, but I guess what I'm saying is, if your terrain is in really good shape, it's even if you're exposed, would it be very hard for you to get it, or is there any way to kind of speak to that, or is that, I don't know.
Brad, you're clearly trying to get me in trouble here. The way I view it, not that I'm invincible, nobody's invincible. our time comes to an end for every single one of us. But the way I view it for myself, for my children, for my wife, for my mom, like for my mother-in-law, like if we have all the boxes checked, like, hey, you are eating right, and you have a stool test to prove that you are eating right, and you're pooping right, and you're drinking clean water, and you have an air purifier at night at least, and you're breathing relatively good air, and you have good a good head on your shoulders, and you're thinking right, and speaking with love in the world, like your physiology is going to balance out. And when some little missile comes in to try to poke at your shield, the impact of that missile is going to be greatly diminished. And so there's like, I'm sure that you take 1 million of the healthiest people on this planet and give them actually, I said I'm sure. I'm not sure about anything, but I would bet that if you took the 1 million most healthy people on this planet and gave them, sneezed all over them with this particular virus, that an extremely small amount would pass away, and or even just get severely sick. I think the numbers are what are they as of late? 25% are asymptomatic with this, who get it. And then the next, like 55, 60% will get somewhere between mild symptoms, mild cold-like symptoms, all the way to maybe cold or flu-like symptoms, but the kind of flu-like symptoms where you're still fine at home, feel like crap, but you're still fine at home. And then 15% maybe need to head into the hospital to at least get evaluated, maybe get a little supplemental oxygen and kind of call it a day there. And then a very small percent, 1 to 2% end up in the ICU, of which a certain small percent, or if you get to the ICU, you might get intubated, but another small overall percent end up getting intubated. And I would bet that if you were talking about where people were really truly fixing their terrain, nobody's perfect, like nobody's terrain is perfect, right? That's not possible, but you can at least work on all of those areas. And I don't know the data because I don't have it. This is me just kind of spewing my opinion, but to me, I would not worry if I knew that my terrain was healthy, that my wife's terrain was healthy, that my kids' terrain was healthy. Like, outside of how we might infect others, like I know that if we get the virus, like our chances of having really bad repercussions are just phenomenally small, and there's like being hit by lightning on a clear day, right? I don't have any data to back that up. Okay, so, but that is my belief.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Julia.
Hi.
Hi.
Is there a way for
Yes.
anyone, yes, to increase our so if we have antibodies, we might have various degrees of them, and they might be variously effective as far as immunity goes. Is that influenceable? Like, if our terrain, as we've been speaking, is doing well, is there like a correlation between that and having more antibodies later, or is that just some random?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that you pose, because on one hand, so I've talked about IgG antibodies. Those are the long-term kind of immunity protection antibodies. You have the IgM, which it's kind of the first poorly made antibodies that are there almost right away within a couple of days and maybe last 2 or 3 weeks, but then kind of go away, while the better quality IgG antibodies are slowly made and last over time. We also have IgA antibodies, which are much more from our mucous membranes, so are really our gut, our GI tract. And the healthier our system is, like, you're going to just deal with those viruses almost right away, because we have a humoral response, which is all the antibody route. We also have this cell-mediated response of the immune system. It's this whole second branch that is, I've kind of left out of the conversation in most of these, probably all of these calls actually. And the cell-mediated response is really aimed at, it's kind of your general guard. And so it's just like, okay, this virus is coming here. I'm just going to send whatever I have, just kind of pick up the rocks and sticks around me and just start throwing it at it. It's not very specific to
Right.
killing any specific virus, but it's just going to kind of like hit anything, right? But the healthier my terrain is, the healthier that cell-mediated response is going to be. And so I'm just it's going to neutralize the threat very quickly, but I'm still going to be able to identify that virus and create an antibody response. And the healthier you are, the better your antibody response is. So to answer your question, if the answer was yes, and it still is yes. But I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of that cell-mediated knowledge too, hopefully.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I don't see any more hands up. Anybody else want to just unmute?
It kind of is, oh, sorry. It kind of is a Wild West environment out there in employment land, because like California has a COVID leave plan in place that if you're sick with COVID, you're reimbursed through your benefit plan. It does not come off of your sick time accruals.
Correct.
But that plan, at least for my employer, started on March 23rd. So I might have been sick through the whole first half of March, and I don't qualify for the plan, whether if I did test positive for COVID. That's
Correct.
just so strange. But
Yeah,
I just wanted to share that. It's not really a question.
that is true. I didn't remember that it was that date, but I mean, honestly, this actually came up in our office. It ended up not being COVID. It's just some other kind of useless virus, or I should say, immune strengthening virus. So yes, it is. California currently allows up to 10 days worth of basically sick COVID-19 days that don't accrue towards your normal sick time. Yeah.
Yes. Too bad if it takes you 21 days.
Yes. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes. Is that Virginia?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or
Virginia.
Gigi.
Hi.
I'm still trying to figure out how to do this Zoom. Especially I'm using my phone here.
You're doing great. You got it.
Okay, good. So, sorry I tuned in late again to your thing. I had a call from my dad who's in the hospital. He's dying from cancer. Lung cancer. Yeah. He's five months to live according to the doctors. And there's total lockdown there, so we can't go in or out. And he's turning 75, so I've been trying to organize a Zoom birthday party for him for next month with his family and stuff. But I didn't know. I saw this email go around, and it sounded a little too good to be true. But it says it's based on research from UCLA and that from research from what happened in Italy. And I wondered if you'd heard about it and if you have any thoughts about it with COVID. on, they're saying that autopsies have proven that COVID-19 is a disseminated intravascular coagulation or preliminary thrombosis. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, so I did mention this, and I did talk about this, but it goes back to, yes, it's a blood thickening and blood vessel wall inflammation. It seems like there's I mean, 3 months from now, maybe there's a completely different theory, but as of right now, when you kind of combine all of the cases and data, poor data as well as good data collection, it really does look to me to be very promising that that is the case, that this is a disease of the blood vessels.
So then they were also, talking about the solution, which was very simple for that, like a blood thinner, taking an aspirin. And a friend of mine actually had a heart attack in 2018, and she's on some kind of blood pressure medication, and she just had a feeling psychically, I guess, that she was immune. So this rang true for her, and she was sharing about it. And somebody else was talking about, it was taking an aspirin, but don't take vitamin E or whatever. And then just some simple things that you can do. And I wondered what you thought about that part of it, if you think it is related.
Yeah, there was also, can't remember which institution this was, but it looked like those who took an ACE inhibitor and a statin, actually that offered some protection. And that's because the ACE inhibitor is going to relax blood pressure, which relaxes blood vessels. And the statin is actually very good, even though I'm not a huge fan of statins for other certain diseases. Statins are very good at lowering inflammation in the blood vessels. They're exquisite at doing that. And so from an allopathic standpoint, yeah, take an ACE inhibitor and a statin makes perfect sense, knowing what we know now, that this seems to be a blood vessel disease. Might aspirin work, or some other blood thinner? I would be very surprised if those types of, heparin, warfarin, some of the other atrial fibrillation medications that thin the blood, as well as aspirin. I would be very surprised if most of those don't turn out to be of some benefit. On a natural on a natural front, again, I don't want to name any particular supplements too much, but I will, if I thought an elderly loved one had this, I would insist that they take some enzymes on an empty stomach to
Take what?
help.
Take what?
Take some enzymes to help. Yeah, to help on an empty stomach. When you take it with food, it helps digest food. When you take it on an empty stomach, it does something to chew up the inflammatory proteins and thereby likely make blood thinner. There's many other options, but that's to me a really awesome option, perhaps.
That's great. What about people who have diabetes or blood pressure problems like me? I have light blood pressure problems, but I don't take any medicine.
Yeah, I'm like I've said before, I don't want to turn this into kind of an individual consult, so I'm not going to be speaking to your medical condition specifically. But I mentioned magnesium before.
Right, I heard that.
Psychological standpoint, magnesium is very fantastic to relax blood vessels also. And then blood sugar is, if I'm not mistaken, you had kind of mentioned that on one of the prior calls.
Yeah.
I think in your situation, that's probably a much more nuanced discussion to be had offline. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I have a spray for magnesium.
Awesome.
Do you know how much
Great.
you should spray? How often you use it?
I use magnesium spray a lot of times before bed, and I basically will do enough to the point, as long as it's not dripping off my body.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, take care. And let's go Spencer. I'm going to unmute you. Sorry, I think there's a little delay in my clicker. I'm not sure why. Okay, go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't know what my Zoom controls don't seem to be working very well today. Yeah, go ahead, Spencer. I can't hear anything. I don't see you on my screen. So I'm not able to see if your mouth is moving, but I cannot hear anything, Spencer. So maybe play around with that. And if anyone else in the meantime, it's 2 o'clock now, so I'll probably wrap this up here in the next couple minutes. And Spencer, I'll just leave you unmuted and go ahead and just give me a little, say something once you figure something out there. And in the meantime, anybody else have any other last minute questions? Seems like we're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I was on my phone. I don't have a mic for the computer.
All good.
You had mentioned zinc. What quantity of zinc do you recommend?
It's hard to make that generalization.
Okay.
Because that's where it's like, it's really nice to have an objective zinc measurement to make a recommendation, because there's like some people have kind of suggested 220 milligrams of zinc sulfate, I believe it is, to actually treat. Others have recommended that to treat this infection. That's a humongous dose, especially if the right amount of copper is not taken with it. For a lot of people, like some people have normal zinc levels, right? Like just taking the food that you take and maybe the 1 or 2 supplements that you take, that might be enough to have your zinc levels at a really good level already. And so that is not someone who should just be taking zinc prophylactically, in my opinion, because too much zinc in your system can dampen the immune system, right? It's like everything else. It's never more is better. It's more is better until it starts being less better and even damaging to your system. So I don't want to make a blanket, this is how much somebody should take. I will tell you, like a kind of a multivitamin dose is probably around 5 milligrams a day. That's kind of a multivitamin type of dosage. But it really should be those, and that goes for all the vitamin, I've mentioned, forget if I mentioned them now or in the past, but like all the vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2, and vitamin C have all been shown in various studies at this point. On the mineral front, zinc and magnesium and selenium, to my knowledge, those are kind of the 3 major ones that have been shown to link up with this disease. And those should all be measured, because then you can get a natural dose, because too much of any of those is harmful. Natural is not always good, right?
Right.
Great
All right.
question.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And if there's one more question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap this up. I don't see anybody else with their hands up. All right. I think we are good. Thank you all for donating your time. It's always useful. I hope this served you all in some way. And again, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and go spread some love. This world needs more of it, maybe more than ever. At least our country needs it more than ever. So go spread some love.
Are you
Bye,
going to
everyone.
post the video?
Yeah,
later?
it'll be coming out in a couple days.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you.